Canadians are known for many things around the world. One of them is being extremely nice people. The second being our love for Tim Hortons and poutine. Third, being extremely good at hockey, which, by the way, because I am from Calgary, so that's just who we support over here. And lastly, one of the least affordable housing markets in a developed nation. I'm Karndeep Gung, and in this video, we're going to be taking a deep dive look into how the Canadian housing market turned into an international joke and what events and policies took place to lead us to this place. All right, the first thing that we need to do is we got to get into our time machines and head all the way back to the 1990s. If we look back in the 90s in Canada, it was a great time. The Toronto Blue Jays won the World Series. Men's Canadian hockey ends its 33-year gold medal drought, but economically, it was struggling a little bit. Housing in Canada was booming in the 80s because of low interest rates and new investor immigrant inflows, which means immigrants with strong economic backgrounds were coming in and buying real estate, which helped the economy. However, in 1990, the Bank of Canada aggressively raised interest rates where they peaked at around 14.75% to fight off the inflation from the 80s. By 1990, average home values were falling, especially in oversaturated markets such as Vancouver and Toronto. There was a lot of economic uncertainty at the time, with unemployment rising to over 10%, and at the time, a new goods and service tax, which you guys as the viewer will know as GST, which, fun fact, GST was actually created in 1990. So it wasn't always there. I honestly, before I started researching this video, I thought GST was honestly a tax that was always there, but turns out no. We made it a thing in the 1990s. And that GST came into effect in January 1991. This led to many builders cutting back on spending, and many of the housing projects stalled. With all the uneasiness in the economy, the Government of Canada introduced the Federal Home Buyers Plan in 1992. What this policy entailed was that first-time homebuyers could withdraw RRSP savings for a down payment tax-free to aid in the housing market. In 1992, with interest rates falling and with the introduction of the new homebuyers plan, in the first year of this policy, Canadians withdrew over $1.5 billion from their RRSPs in the first year of the policy taking effect, stimulating demand among young buyers. Then, in 1993, economic recovery was now underway, and the government's tax increases and government deficit cutting measures led to lower interest rates. Housing was still relatively affordable for the average Canadian. However, there was a significant increase of immigrants, approximately 250,000 of them, and many of them were primarily from Hong Kong. And if you don't know, Hong Kong was being set to be released from British rule and passed back over control to the People's Republic of China in 1997. This created fear for the people living there, fearing that it would go from a capitalist state to a communist state. So they fled Hong Kong and settled down in primarily Toronto and Vancouver areas. And this wave of immigrants coming in from Hong Kong, they weren't just refugees or that kind of class of immigrants. These guys had money. Like crazy rich Asian money, because they were in Hong Kong with all these capitalist policies. They had money to just like flee from there. So they put all that money into like real estate and boosting the Canadian economy at the time. So this wave of immigration was so beneficial for Canada, in fact, that in Vancouver, all the new economic spending helped offset local recessionary effects. In 1994, Canada's housing market saw a turning point. The economy grew solidly, and the Bank of Canada's defense against inflation was successful, and mortgage rates dipped to nearly 8%, which was the lowest in the new decade. In 1994, some of the Hong Kong immigrants decided to move back after seeing the policy of one country, two systems announced by China, meaning that Hong Kong would stay a capitalist system, meanwhile the rest of China would remain communist. In 1997, Hong Kong's handover to China occurred, and as I said previously, the communist fear didn't materialize, so there were less immigrants from Hong Kong. However, another black swan event in the world was taking place. The Asian financial crash, which I will probably make another video about a little bit later, but for right now, let me just summarize the event. So global stock markets, especially in Asia, were in decline and caused a brief pause in foreign investments. However, wealthy Asians from countries such as South Korea, Taiwan, and Indonesia were seeking safe havens, and one of the options was the Canadian housing market. See, Canada at this time had no regulations on foreign investment on residential real estate, individual homebuyers, and non-resident ownership of housing. So this meant during the entire 1990s and 2000s, non-Canadians could freely buy residential property, no citizenship or residency requirement. There was no limit on the number of homes they could purchase, no requirement to live in the property, there were no vacancy penalties, no special taxes on non-residents. And this wasn't a loophole, it was an intentional open market stance. And why did Canada allow this? Canada believed property rights should be equal. And the capital inflows from all this spending on real estate strengthen our own economy. See, this all sounds all well and dandy, just like hearing it, it's you get more money pushing into the real estate market, that boosts the economy. But let me tell you some fun facts. I guess they're not really fun, but just some facts and policies that the Canadian government had at the time that kind of overlooked all this spending. There was no foreign buyer tracking in the 1990s or early 2000s. Governments didn't even measure foreign ownership. Land registries didn't track residency. There was no national database or buyer nationality. So policymakers at the time genuinely didn't see housing as a foreign investment issue. They had no data showing concentration effects, and this is why serious tracking only appears after 2015. And if you're wondering why all these foreign investors decided Canada was the best place to put their money in, there are a couple of reasons for that. A, Canada was an English-speaking nation, which meant that doing business in English was a lot easier. It's also extremely safe. If you do live in Canada, you know that we can complain all we want that there's a lot of crime here, but compared to many other developed nations and things like that, it's a very safe country, especially in the early 2000s and 1990. And lastly, the Canadian currency isn't as strong as every other currency, so buying real estate and converting that money into what's it called real estate was actually beneficial for foreign investment as well. So that's why they put a lot of their money into Canada. So with all these factors combined together that we saw in 1998, cheap credit and solid income growth fueled foreign investment into Canadian housing, primarily from Hong Kong and other Asian countries at the time, looking for a safe haven to grow their investments. And in 1999, the housing market went from a decline in the early 90s to growth mode at the end of the decade. So that ends off the 90s section of this video so far. So let's just summarize real quickly before we move on. So in the start of the decade, Canada was in a severe recession, which caused the Bank of Canada to increase inflation rates and introduce something called GST, the Goods and Service Tax, which really slowed down economic activity. And then to combat this, the government then released the Federal Home Buyers Plan. And then in the middle of the decade, we saw how geopolitical conflicts such as the Hong Kong handover and the Asian market crisis caused new investors and new immigrants to actually come over to Canada and spend their hard-earned money over here and actually boost the economic activity in Canada. And since Canada was a safe haven and it had all these unregulated foreign policies, it created a very perfect scenario for foreign investors just to put all their money into Canadian real estate, whether they live here or they don't. And then they could just slowly profit off of it, even if they, if they didn't have to live here. They could be living in Antarctica for all we know, and then own an entire residential complex, and then you would have no idea. But because of all that economic activity, the Canadian economy actually slipped out of a recession, was actually in a boom period towards the early 2000s. So I guess it was a good thing, but we'll see how later on this really affected the Canadian housing market as well. So with that, let's move on to the 2000s part of this section. So in the year 2000, the new millennium saw housing demand start to increase as the dot-com boom created wealth and attracted skilled immigrants. And when the dot-com bubble burst in mid-2000, that also caused Canadians to look at real estate as a more stable investment, which very positively affected housing prices. In 2001, we had the 9/11 attacks in New York, which shocked the global economy. And to keep spending going, the Bank of Canada slashed their overnight rates to less than 3%. Additionally, China became a member of the World Trade Organizations due to their accelerated wealth, and it had no direct causes here, but this is important for later on. CMHC, which also stands for Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, also introduced a 30-year mortgage for the first time in this year, allowing for more flexible payment options for Canadians. And then in 2002, Canada mainly saw a commodities boom in oil, gas, and metal prices, mainly driven by the Chinese demand, and the Federal Immigrant Investment Program continued to bring in wealthy migrants, mainly from China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. And in 2002, average home prices rose over 10% for the first time in a single year in the last 12 years. And now we're going to combine 2003, 2004, 2005, and 2006 into one big section over here because it was all kind of just all the same over here. So let's get into that as well. So in 2003, CMHC started to insure longer and riskier mortgages, which if you've seen The Big Short, you probably already have an idea on how this will turn out, but keep watching because it's not as black and white as you might think, because what happened in the US may or may not actually happen to what happens in Canada. By 2005, average Canadian home prices have increased about 50% compared to where they were in 2000. In 2006, CMHC starts approving 40-year mortgages with $0 down payments, and by 2007, house prices are now 86% higher than what they were a decade ago. So to put that into context, a house in 1997 that was going for $200K would have an asking price of $374,000, which would make the homeowner very happy because they just earned $174,000 over 10 years of waiting. But buyers would be concerned. 2007 is also the year where my parents bought the house that I'm currently in as well. So in hindsight, it was kind of a bad decision to buy it now because that's when everything was peaking. But honestly, it kind of worked out for us in the end, which I will talk about like later on as well. Now let's go into 2008. We all know what happened in 2008, but let's talk about it a little bit more. 2008 is when the big subprime crash occurred in the USA. So you would think that Canada's real estate market would have been impacted just as hard as the US, but no. Prices only fell approximately 9% nationally, which is far less than the US, which saw a decline of 16% nationally in 2008 alone. The reason Canada was safe was because the government launched the Insured Mortgage Purchase Program, where they bought up to $125 billion of insured mortgages from the bank to keep credit flowing. CMHC also begins to tighten its mortgage rules, and now you can no longer buy a house with $0 down. You need a minimum of 5% down payment to apply for a mortgage. And in 2009, prices fully recover in Canada, and new highs are achieved, which really locked in housing as a proven asset class in Canada. Not only to Canadians, but to foreign investors as well. So that leads us to the end of the decade. So let's actually summarize what happened during the 2000s as well. So at the beginning of the decade, we saw that the dot-com bubble actually spiked up incomes for average Canadians, so they spent that into housing. And then when the dot-com bubble crashed, people saw housing as a solidified asset class because the housing market actually didn't crash unlike everything else. So more people ended up putting their money into the real estate market. And then towards the middle of the decade, CMHC decided to actually loosen their restrictions and barriers of entry into what's called the housing market by creating zero down loans and 30-year mortgage terms, which allowed more easier flexibility for Canadians to actually get into housing as well. We also saw that China got introduced as a World Trade Organization member. So what that meant is that, like I said, with the commodities, oil, and metal, China was a big buyer for a lot of these new things. So that actually saw a boom for Canadian exporters, which again, if you are getting money, you should probably invest your money into some sort of like investment such as real estate or stocks, which a lot of Canadians actually did end up doing in this period as well, because putting your money into real estate was almost like a guaranteed return at this point. And then towards 2008, when the big crash did happen, Canadians weren't affected that much. So in 2009 and 2010, real estate investments are actually solidified as a solid like investment choice for Canadians. So now we have a lot more people putting their money in. And now this video is going to end because, like the title says, this is actually part one of the Canadian housing crisis. Reason why it's part one is because I have to like put in a lot of content because I'm barely getting any views. So I just need to put out like maybe like one video every like 1 or 2 weeks. So we're just trying to get out like a bunch of content just all out at once. And I'm hoping that like when I get part two out, part two will include the recession period in 2014, the influx of refugees from Syria and other war-torn countries, and also the Indian immigration towards 2016, 2017, how that affected the Canadian housing market, and also government policies that kind of just like didn't really focus on building houses at the time for all these like newcomers coming in. And also take a look at some like municipal and provincial strategies, such as Vancouver putting a tax on foreign investors, which led them all to go to Toronto. So that'll all be in the next video. So that'll be a pretty good one. So if you like this video, make sure you hit the like button. I believe it's down here. Subscribe button is right over here, so make sure you hit both of those. If you didn't like this video, hit a dislike. If you want to leave a comment on anything that you agree with, disagree with, leave that down below. I will respond to as many comments as I possibly can. If you have an idea for future videos, also leave that below as well. Let's get the comments really going in this video, because on my last NVIDIA video, we got 0 comments. So a little bit disappointed by that, I'm not gonna lie. But you know, it is the early stages of the YouTube career, so I'm not really expecting too much. But yeah, stay subscribed for part 2, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. And as always, I'm Karndeep Kang. Thank you for watching my video. Peace.
America got a thing for this gangsta shit. They love me. Black Chuckers, Black Scully, leather Pele. I take spit over rainbow shit. I'm a fan who got that silver duck.
Alright, hello, this is post-production Karndeep here. I'm just wrapping up the final touches on the video. So I just want to let you guys know that for all the statistics about this video, just so you know that I'm not bullshitting, I put all of the information, charts and things like that onto a Google Doc that I will link on the video as well, with the interest rates and other data tables. One gripe that I had, CMHC, if you're watching, how is this is the actual CMHC website, how is this your standard for information? It's I love researching and stuff, right? But when I come across data tables that look like they were like last updated in the 1980s, and like this is like very recent data as well. Why does it look like that? Make it look appealing. But I just want to let you guys know, yeah. So I will have that like link down below, so you guys will be able to see where I'm getting my information from. And yeah, if you made it this far, I'm really happy, Just really make sure you leave a like and subscribe at this point. And yeah, I'll see you guys in part 2. Part 2 is gonna be really good too. We're getting that done right now. The date is February 9th. We started this project in the beginning of the month, and it's taking a long time, but that's just the editing universe. But yeah, again, thank you guys for watching. So